What's going on, family? Glad to be clean, recovered addict Scotland. My name's Paul. We're going to be doing a podcast around step 6 today of Cocaine Anonymous, which is we're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character. So welcome to the podcast. Jess has joined us today from Canada. Would you like to say hello to our listeners?
Hey everyone, my name is Jess. I'm a grateful member of CA and recovered addict and alcoholic.
Well, we're really pleased you've joined us. Good stuff. So this channel has videos on steps 1 through to 6. Also an introduction to Cocaine Anonymous, the program and the steps, and also a video on sponsorship. What is a sponsor in Cocaine Anonymous? So do check those videos out. Please like and subscribe. And if you have any questions, put them in the comments. And most of all, please get yourself along to a CA meeting. Towards the end of the podcast, I'll put up a screen with some meetings on it, where you can come along and listen to a message of faith, hope and courage, and how we get free and stay free from active addiction. So I'm really pleased. Jess, would you like to share with our listeners about recovery?
On step 6, yes?
Yeah,
just recovery in
general
general
terms, recovery from addiction, abstinence, and then we'll get into the step afterwards, if that's all right.
Well, for me, there, like it says in the big book, there was no middle of the road solution. I came in, I was not even I was like a shell of a human being, because that's what happens when I was out there for so many years. I thought that the life I was living was the only one that was possible, and it talks about that in the big book, or how eventually we can't differentiate the true from the false, because I suffered from a spiritual malady. So I have a physical craving matched with this crazy mental obsession in my head, where I'm just hardwired to, pick up and use and rinse and repeat, until I am able to come into a place such as CA, and one day at a time, by working with my sponsor and doing the steps to the best of my ability, I got free from that, and it's an amazing thing for someone whose stopping point was dying to be able to wake up every day and just show up for life. And, it's a journey, and it's not something that I could have ever done alone, because I was with a lot of people that were suffering from the same illness as me, but I needed to find people that had a solution, to this disease, as I found out.
Absolutely. And I think that's the power of the fellowship, isn't it? The power of community. Being around folks that got free and stayed free. I know in previous podcasts we've discussed, how it's important to work the fellowship as well as work the program of Cocaine Anonymous. We listen to others, and we find a sense of society, if you like, friendship and camaraderie with folks that have also got free. I think it's a really powerful thing. So today we're going to be talking about step 6. And up on the screen as usual, I've got the information on step 6 from the 12 steps and 12 traditions, which is our second book. We use mainly a book called Alcoholics Anonymous that we often call the big book. Our sort of second book, if you like, is the 12 steps and 12 traditions, which is what I've got up on the screen here. And it has 6 or 8 pages on each of the steps and each of the traditions. So step 6 is a really, really important step. I think it's worthy of mentioning there's another great book called Drop the Rock, and it's quite expensive to buy, and that's about step 6 and 7. Becoming ready for God to remove these defects of character, and then humbly asking God to remove our shortcomings in step 7, which we'll come to on the next podcast. I've had people say, Jess, that you know, there's not much to be said about step 6, but I disagree. I think it's a
Yeah, I
huge,
disagree too. Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know. So what's your thoughts on step 6 and its order in the progression through this program?
Well, it's interesting because it's like literally not even half a paragraph in our basic text, you know, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And it's kind of sandwiched between two steps that seem huge, you know. It's like one of them, we're starting to turn over everything that, you know, stands in our way of being useful to our fellows. And, you know, the spiritual principles that Bill W., the founder of AA, assigned to each step, you know, like the one for step 5 is integrity. And that's a huge one. That's like the unburdening and figuring out where our harms are caused and everything. But the funny thing is that for such a simple step as 6, I find it is absolutely critical, critical, because unless I actually fully comprehend and understand these natures of my wrongs, the principle for step 6 is willingness. And, you know, they say at the beginning that those 3 things are things that cannot be given to us in recovery: the honesty, the open-mindedness, and the willingness. You know, but if I just wake up every day and I just say, hey, God, you know, can you make sure I'm not going to be angry? You know, probably I'm going to get angry because there's no willingness behind it and it's just words. And, you know, previous to this, I've sat for a while and, you know, I've contemplated whether or not I've actually completed all of these things to the best of my ability, if I'm wholeheartedly ready to go forward with this. Because this is like the destruction of self. And, you know, for me, I'm a mucker, which is someone who works solely in the big book of AA. And for me, this was, you know, literally having to go through a list of defects. It had character defects all down one side, and then, you know, so it's like my will, and then on the other side, you know, God's will, and the opposite of these defects. And yeah, so for me, it was a really eye-opening experience, and it was the beginning of an ongoing journey of awareness.
Yeah. Yes. And I think it's really important to see, you know, step 6 in relation to the preceding steps and the steps that follow on. I mean, in step 1, we take a honest appraisal of active addiction, don't we? We look at the real-time consequences on our family, on our friends, on our feelings, on our finances, on our relationships, on our liberty, and just on our general well-being in life, don't we? That it's like the first of the inventory. Step 1's really, really important. You know, it's been said, hasn't it, that if we don't have a thorough step 1, then there's a distinct possibility we may well use again. And also that if we do have a thorough step 1, and you're really in the light around step 1, which is a honest admission of the reality about addiction, then why the hell would you want to use again? Right? If you know what those consequences are, you know, and part of the process, Jess, and I just want to state I'm just a member of Cocaine Anonymous. I'm not a spokesman. This is all my opinion. You know, that, you know, we go through this process and we start having our own personal spirituality. We learn to practice our personal spirituality on a daily basis. We prayerfully and thoughtfully try to practice these principles. And as we go through the steps, we continue to maintain honesty and some serenity and sanity around step 1, which is really important, you know. And then we come to step 2, which is faith and trust. This process can work for me. You know, I can stay clean and have a better future through this process. And, you know, my willingness in step 3 to try the program, to have faith and trust that this can work, recovery can work. And then the second of the inventory steps in step 4 is a really thorough searching inventory, you know, resentments, fears and harms, all resentments that I've ever had, all fears that I've ever had, and all harms that I've ever done. And then all that information in the last columns of those 3 sets of inventories in 4 give me the information for 5. Here's the exact nature of my wrongs, Jess. Here they are. And then I come to 6, then I see all these things as character defects. It's almost like a gentle pause in the steps. It says, right, okay, we've now identified the character defects. Here they are, you know, and by this time we're usually attending meetings, we're doing service, we're reaching out to others, we've got a support network, you know, we're thoroughly on that bridge to normal living. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you. You know, I view the steps as like a process of awareness, you know. And I really like what you said about step 1, because that's what we hear, right? The only step you have to do 100% is step 1, you know, because until I'm able to say, like, wow, my life is a disaster because of my substance use or my mental health or whatever it might be, you know. But for us, it's cocaine and all other mind altering substances. When I try to control these things, my life just gets even more and more of a mess. But yeah, with step 6, it is one of the simpler steps to do. But I mean, there were some things that were on my defects of character that, you know, hadn't even occurred to me to ever think of myself that way, you know. And as it says in the 12 and 12 that you had here on the screen, you know, I really like what it says, you know, because it talks about the fact, you know, entirely ready, right? Are the key words for step 6. And it's like, no one is ever entirely ready, you know, and these are just the ideals. There's so many ideals, and our job is to just, you know, do the best that we can, you know.
Yeah. I think that's really important. Sorry, carry on.
And, you know, I really like too what someone said, like I heard someone call them defaults of character. And this is not me picking up a stick and, you know, getting all depressed and morbid self-reflection, being like, wow, I'm a terrible human being and all of these things, because most of these things are common human characteristics. It's just that when I apply them through my will, you know, things go awry. You know,
yeah, exactly.
Pride is not necessarily a bad thing. It's good to be proud of yourself. But when I'm running on ego, self-knowledge, you know, chances are I'm not going to get very far in my recovery, right?
Absolutely. And, you know, it's been said before that, you know, one of the personal steps is ego deflation.
Yeah.
Ego deflation, you know, self-will was our problem. You know, self-will run riot. I think there's a lot of complexities around recovery, you know, and we're just offering up a bite-sized understanding of step 6. You know, I could literally talk for days about step 6, you know, readiness. You've mentioned it, readiness. And by the way, folks, you can rewind, and if you want to reread what's on the screen at any point, you know, readiness, and perhaps for the first time in our whole lives, we've looked at character defects, you know, and I think very much, you know, the solution is to get God's power and wisdom, you know, and to have that connection ongoing, and to pursue spirituality, personal spirituality on a daily basis, is the secret. You know what I mean? Instead of pursuing drugs and chemicals, we pursue our higher power, don't we? And, you know, we try to walk in faith with our Creator, you know, and get that understanding and wisdom. You know, I don't think we can necessarily dot all the I's and cross all the T's when you're talking about power and wisdom and serenity and courage. I think
we're not saints, that's for sure. We're not saints. That's
right. It's progress, not perfection. And I think that's what I'm trying to say. You know, I'm conscious that some of our listeners, Jess, could be still struggling with addiction right now. You know what I mean? They might be sitting there surrounded by bags and debt and despair and pain and torment, physical and mental problems, marital problems. If you're listening to this, you know, you can get clean from drugs and you can find a happier way to live. You know, it's possible to get clean. In fact, our promise is freedom. You know that any addict can quit using, lulls the desire to use and find a new way to live. That's our promise. You know, and we've just completed a video on sponsorship. So if this step seems confusing or a tall order or the information on the screen seems heavy, a sponsor is someone that's armed with the facts about addiction and recovery. They will have been through this process themselves with their sponsor. They will have experience around these steps. They will have wisdom and knowledge around these steps. And if they can't answer any questions around a particular step or principle, they will have their own support group that they can reach out to try and get answers. You know, and that's the power of the fellowship there.
Well, that's the beautiful thing, you know, like for me, like I have a sponsor who has a sponsor who has a sponsor, you know, and all of those things are accessible. All of those people are accessible to my sponsees, you know, and that's the beautiful thing. And it helps me, what we call, you know, finding that middle ground is like, for me, it's right sizeness where you know, because like, even if I think I'm the worst human being in the world, it's still ego, right? But just to touch on that, you know, like if you're listening to this and you are like still in the grips of this malady, it doesn't have to be that way. And this is that for me, for years, I had no idea that there was another way to be. And the beautiful thing is that now I can be here and I can tell you that you can be free, you know, that there is another way to go. And I don't know, perhaps it's pertinent to touch on the bedevilments in the big book, these things where, you know, when we're in our addiction, it says we're prey to misery, depression, and all of these things. We can't really be of real use to other people. But the thing is that we have promises for every single step. And as we continue to become aware of, you know, the things that fail me, you know, for me, a big one was self-reliance, you know. I had things on my defects that surprised me, like violence, you know, to understand that there's shades of violence, you know, just because I've never taken it to a crazy extreme. Some people have, you know, but it's about getting honest and really just looking myself in the mirror and being human.
Yeah.
Because I am not perfect. And thank God for that. So much pressure in being perfect, right? It's impossible. It's an impossible task, you know? And every day when I wake up, I have to ask for some willingness, you know? I have to turn over those defects. And I mean, that's something that will be talked about more in the next episode on step 7. But I mean, it is kind of hard to talk about 6 without talking about 7, right, Paul?
Absolutely. And that's the important thing. You know, we go through the steps in order with a sponsor that's been through this process and has knowledge around it and has got their own personal spiritual journey. You know, and where do you get a sponsor? Well, in Cocaine Anonymous meetings, in most meetings, men and women will offer their services as a sponsor. A sponsor is a volunteer. It's someone that's in recovery. It's someone that's reasonably knowledgeable about addiction and recovery, and themselves as a support group. So you're accessing a wealth of information and support. You know, so you can go through all this process to have your own spiritual experience, to have your own change of perceptions, right? That's sufficient to liberate you from the disease of addiction. I mean, Jess, you know, I used and used and used, you know what I mean? Today I don't use, you know, not every day is easy. life isn't perfect. There's always problems and pressures, it's an imperfect world, but we are generally happier than when we were using. And that's the miracle, that we can be happier and healthier and more whole without drugs, Now this step's really important in the personality change as regards facing up, as you said, honestly, to our defects of character with a view to moving on to the next step. And I know I mentioned the book Drop the Rock earlier. That's a very helpful book on steps 6 and 7. Have you seen any of that book, Jess?
I have seen it. And he's written another one called The Ripple Effect. It's also on 10 and 11. And he also has a 12-step prayer and meditation book, which is really delightful. And I don't usually use the word delightful, so that's not me.
It's a lovely word.
Yeah, like Drop the Rock. I know people that have gone through it. I have it. I haven't gotten around to reading it yet. I mean, I've read bits and pieces of it. I think the best way to go through that is, there are online meetings that are Drop the Rock meetings where they go through it together as a group. And it's definitely not a starting point. So, if you're sitting there and you're contemplating going to a meeting, or, you're on your step 1 or 2, I don't suggest that you then start reading Drop the Rock.
Absolutely. I mean,
it's like the 12 and 12, right? Like, I could never sponsor someone with the 12 and 12. It would be very hard, but it's a supplement to it to continue to grow. And I think it's because, it needed to be expanded on, because 6 and 7 in total are like a paragraph in the big book. Whereas a lot of the other steps, it's pages and pages. I mean, there's 45 pages just on step 1, right? And it's a critical step. And it's something that is constantly needing to be reviewed by me, because as I work my program, as I go through life, these things are going to keep cropping up. And I think that's the really important thing to remember, is that we're not perfect people. And when I become entirely ready, when I get the willingness to, continue this, what they call a psychic change, that's essential to a spiritual experience for a lot of people. I definitely didn't have the thunderbolts and lightning moment, I was the slower kind. But these things are going to keep cropping up. So if you're like, I can't even imagine that, never being angry, never being spiteful, never being depressed or scared again. Well, no, you're not a blank slate. You're a human being, and these things will keep cropping up. But I found that step 6 really confirmed for me further the reality of a different way of being.
Yeah.
And so, like it says later on in the big book, one of my favorite lines in the big book is, it says, we become able to match calamity with serenity. And I mean, for anyone who's like been there or is there, out in the madness, I mean, what more could we want, right, than to be
Absolutely.
able to match calamity with serenity,
Absolutely. And I think that's the miracle of it. Whereas at one time we would have used drugs if there was any calamity, and we would have used drugs if we were happy, if we were joyful, and if we was feeling mediocre. And I think the thing is we get on a program of spirituality, which is the cure for the obsession to use drugs. I mean, it's a complete transformation. It's a better future that's on offer. Recovery is an inside job, just as chemical abuse was an inside job and a personal thing. Recovery has to be personal. I say to persons I work with, this is your journey through the 12 steps. I'm just going to be guiding you through it. It's your step work. You know what I mean?
Exactly. I mean, the 12 steps, it's a program that's one size fits all, but recovery is definitely not one size fits all, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And that's the thing. There's as many different types of sponsors as there are types of addicts, right?
Well, that's
So
right. Yeah.
it's definitely important that you find someone who is there to support your recovery. And see here on the screen, it says what I was mentioning before. You know, it says only step one, where we made the 100% admission we are powerless over alcohol, can be practiced with perfection. The remaining 11 steps state perfect ideals. They are goals towards which we look, and the measuring sticks by which we estimate our progress. And then, you know, the only urgent thing is that we make a beginning and keep trying.
Exactly.
I mean, isn't that like the essence of recovery, right? Just make a beginning and keep trying to do your best, right?
I like that. I like that. And I think as well to understand, you know, the importance of being on that spiritual journey, because, you know, when we're not continuing on maintaining a fit spiritual condition, behavior can come out, and words can come out with others. The way we speak to others and behave around others can reveal that we're not maintaining a fit spiritual condition. And I think that you know, we can work the step backwards, where we start manifesting the defects of character, the exact nature of your wrongs, before we know it. We're back in step 4. We're resentful, fearful, and when we're resentful and fearful, we're usually harmful, because hurting people hurt people, and misery likes company. So it's really important, once we get clean, that we stay, you know, and try to live on a spiritual basis, and try to practice these principles, and keep on keeping on, never give up.
Yeah, and you know, as we've both mentioned, time like throughout this episode, you're not. We don't do this alone, right? We don't have to do this alone, and there's no hard and fast rules about things. I really like what you just said though about working the steps backwards, because this is the thing. Is like some days, you know, I fall back into being restless, irritable, and discontent, you know, and then I yell at my dog, or I lash out at a neighbor, even though they did nothing wrong. And then the next thing I know, like the insanity is back. And then, you know, I've learned that, you know, I'm completely capable of burning my life to the ground without ever picking up another drug or drink, you know, because it's not about the drugs or alcohol, you know. It's not, because at the end of the day, I mean, that was my solution for years and years and years, a solution which arguably may never have worked at all, you know. And I needed a new solution. I needed someone to let me know that, hey, guess what, I have a design for living that will work in rough going. And maybe you don't believe in yourself now, and you don't really like yourself or know who you are, but we are here. And, you know, find a sponsor who has something that you want. And I don't mean that in a material way, you know. For me, my sponsor, I mean, she was just very, I'm a human being and I stay clean because, you know, I work with others and I have a spiritual, because this is the thing, is powerlessness, you know, is a defining theme of my life out there in the madness. And I'm sure you can definitely agree with that, Paul. And, you know, well beyond like ever using substances, you know. But this stuff is critical, and we could talk about it forever, you know. The importance, I think, is like it said, just make a beginning, and we'll come to see that this way of living is infinitely more satisfying than the one we were living before, you know. Paul? Did we lose you, Paul?
Yeah, I'm back. Here I am. Yeah. How's my audio? Okay. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. Yeah, so, and I think it's really important as regards being aware. We become self-aware, you know, and that awareness and self-knowledge means we can be conscious of when we are maintaining that contact, you know, with our creator or with our higher power or your inner self, whatever you believe. And you're aware when you're in that flow of life and you're helping others, and in the solution rather than in the problem. And if we find ourselves becoming irritable, discontent, if you have that awareness to know that, you know, and then the next thing is, if you don't notice that irritability and restlessness, very often we start manifesting our shortcomings, and then they become a little bit stronger. We start manifesting our defects, and then we're back into the exact nature of wrongs, and then we become resentful and fearful and harmful. And so, you know, for me, working step 6 with blokes, we actually make a list of character defects. We also make a list of character assets. And so for the last minute or two, I'd like to talk about that side of step 6, Jess. You know,
that's what I mentioned before. You know, that list is so important, you know, and that's also goes with the whole not beating yourself up thing. You know, none of this work is about feeling horrible about the person that you were. You know, today I definitely am able to say that I am very grateful that I qualified for this program. But yeah, the list is super important. It's something I can come back to, you know, because this list, it shows me the other side to things, you know. It shows me that when I'm not acting out of my riot running self-will, you know, that instead of being impatient, I can be patient. Instead of being judgmental, I mean, come on, we all like to be a bit judgmental, you know. This is it, is I can be honest about it, right? It's like, yeah, okay. Because a lot of these things are things I held like close to my chest, you know. For a lot of people, they hold these things close to their chest. They want the best face put forward, right?
Absolutely.
And this is it, though, is like, I want to strive for the ideals of not causing harm today, of being more patient and tolerant and kind, you know, and to continue to be aware of both the defect and asset side of it, you know, because if I have an infinite capacity for rage or despair, that means I also have an infinite capacity for kindness and joy, you know. And I don't know, we always had this story about the 2 wolves. You know that one, Paul?
Oh yeah, go ahead. Yeah, sure do.
So someone's telling the story of a little boy, and he says, you know, there's 2 wolves inside of everybody. You know, you got one wolf that's like a darker wolf, and it's like anger and fear and shame and sadness. And then you have a white wolf, or a light wolf, I prefer. And, you know, that is kindness and joy and, you know, the good things, right? And everybody has both of these wolves inside of them, you know, battling it out. And so the boy asks the person telling him this story, and he says, well, which one will win? Which one will win?
Yeah.
And the answer he receives is the one that you choose to feed. So which wolf are you feeding today? Right?
Yeah, right. That's really good, Jason. And very, very topical for step 6, right? We also make a list of character assets. So we generally try and live in the character assets. And even if we feel like living in the defects, we use restraint of pen and tongue, hopefully, and keyboard, and don't live in the defects. You know, we try to practice the assets. And we ask God, we ask our higher power for strength and wisdom and courage to practice our assets. You know, and I you know, I've worked with folks who have had decades of addiction, Jess. really lots and lots of consequences and harms, and resentment, loads of amends. And even such persons, decades in the madness and the chaos and carnage of active addiction, they, generally and severally, they've still largely been in their assets. It's difficult to explain. I think what I mean is, they're still largely capable of manifesting their character assets. So it is the idea of, we rest in God's love, but we strive to enter in the narrow gate. I mean, for me, purity of heart and purity of intention is the high things in recovery before our higher power. It's purity of heart. It's nice if you say, "Oh, Paul, you're a lovely guy," but it doesn't particularly matter, because I've got that relationship with my higher power, so I know, and my higher power knows. Do you know what I mean? And you become strengthened in that relationship. So it's nice if people compliment us, but not necessary. Whereas when we were using in all the carnage and chaos, we were constantly looking for approval of others, and people pleasing and all this stuff. And I think it's emotional sobriety that comes through this process. And for me, 6 and 7 are where the miracles are. It's that bridge to normal living, Jess. And that's us thoroughly on the bridge, boom, right in the middle of the steps. It's the last step of the first half of the steps. I don't know if you ever thought about that, Jess. And step 7 is the first step of the second half of the steps. And I think there's a lot of truth in that in 7 that we're going to look at on the next podcast, which I don't want to say too much about just now. It's the first half of the second half of the steps, and everything past character defects, exact nature wrongs, resentments, fears and harms, consequence and manageability, it's all looked at as shortcomings. If you're new to Cocaine Anonymous, a lot of this might go over the top of your head. My suggestion is come along to meetings. I put the meetings list up on the screen. You're welcome at all these meetings. Please don't ever feel that coming to a Zoom meeting means you have to put your camera on. Probably only a quarter of people attending Zoom meetings put their camera on. Please don't ever think you've got to come to a Zoom meeting and speak. You don't have to speak at all. If you wish to introduce yourself, you may do so. If you wish to share, you may do so. But you're welcome at these meetings. So come along to these meetings, and hear the message of hope, faith, and courage, and that you too can lose the desire to use drugs and find a new way to live and find a happier future, clean and sober. So that more or less brings us to the end of the podcast, Jesse. It's been wonderful talking to you. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
There's acronyms. We love our acronyms, fear. So for me, for most of my life, it was, F everything and run, because that was my solution to everything. But today, I face everything and I recover,
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. I think it's just, again, important to emphasize that a lot of the ways that we were manifesting these assets and defects have to do with the life that we were living. I know for me that being a nice, open, vulnerable person would have been a severe defective character for the life that I was living. Or as you said, seeking approval, but doing it in a way that causes harm versus, it's okay to like when being proud of yourself because you did a good job on something, so again, there is hope. We are here, we are free, as they say. And it just gets better. I can say that today, because we only have to do this one day at a time, that I'm recovered from that seemingly hopeless state of mind and body. Mm-hmm. And that's amazing. It's literally something I never even dreamt was possible. And it's here for you too. And it's free, so come along to a meeting. Maybe I'll see you there, And if you have questions, ask them, you know?
Absolutely. And by all means, put questions down in the comments on YouTube, allows for comments. You know, write anything you want there, and we'll get back to you with our answers. And if we don't have the answers, we can ask people who will have the answers, Jess?
Exactly. Because that's how we do, right?
That's how we run. We're a fellowship, we're a community. There's nothing to sign, nothing to pay, no promises to make to anyone. You know, we're all volunteers. We come along to carry a message of freedom. So, look, that brings us to the end of today's podcast. I'd like to thank you, Jess, for being here with us and sharing your experience, strength, and hope. It's been marvelous having you here.
Thank you, Paul. It's been lovely chatting with you about this, you know, yeah.
And we're going to be recording one on step 7 very soon, over the next day or two. So please like and subscribe, and yeah, keep coming back. Look after yourself, family. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Share.
Indeed. Okay, bye for now.